Welcome to Shardlight Radio. I'm Mr. Ben. On today's episode, I'm going to do two things. First, I'm going to introduce myself, and second, I am going to talk about the vision I have for the way this podcast is going to be run. If you don't care about me, and if you would prefer to discover how the podcast is being run via episodes that have actual Argent Saga content, feel free to skip this episode 0. I assure you that once I put out an episode 1, that will actually contain content that relates directly to Argent Saga. So to begin, I got my start playing card games with the Weatherlight expansion of Magic the Gathering. There was a girl I liked when I was 14, and she wanted to learn how to play Magic, so I learned how to play Magic to make her like me. The girl has long since faded into the past, but this series of events triggered a lifelong obsession in me with card games. I played Magic for a number of years, never placed prominently at anything, but had a great time in the tail end of my high school experience going into college, playing various decks. I kind of fell off around the Torment block, but I never fell out of love with Magic. To this day, I still enjoy the game. I just don't play it aggressively or competitively. When the Versus system, the original Versus system released, I jumped in with both feet as soon as I saw the card game. It fixed some things in Magic that I really hated. Being mana flooded or mana screwed, it is just not a pleasant experience. I don't like any game that has a high percentage chance of non-games taking place. When I sit down to play a game, I want both myself and my opponent to draw the things we need to at least have some kind of interaction. And to me, Versus, with the ability to put any card in your hand into your row as a resource, solved a problem that I saw as being kind of crippling to Magic. Now, clearly Magic has chugged along fine with its resource system, so maybe calling that problem crippling is just, I don't like it. It didn't cripple the game, clearly. I played Versus with varying degrees of success from the moment I discovered the game until the moment Upper Deck ended it in a fairly poor fashion, I would say. My most prominent finish was 3rd place at Mega Weekend Chicago, but I loved the game deeply. Once Upper Deck ended Versus, I kind of bounced around, went back to Magic, but couldn't really get into it again. I played Fight Club for a while, I dabbled in HeroClix, but none of these games really clicked with me. It was just something to do. In 2015, when Upper Deck released the new Versus system, the Versus System 2 PCG, my friend group bought in, but we were all a little bit hesitant. I had sworn I would never give Upper Deck my money again on the basis of how they handled the wind down of the original Versus system, but I kind of got peer pressured into buying into the new Versus system, and after a few expansions, I got pretty hooked on the game. And in July of 2016, I started a podcast, The Build Phase. That was a show that was entirely based around the new Versus system, and that continues to this day. We're closing in on our 200th episode this month. At the same time as getting into Versus and starting this podcast, I discovered Hearthstone. And Hearthstone was another game that fixed some of the problems that I had in other games. It gave me the selective mulligan back, kind of the way the old Versus system did. New Versus system, you draw your hand, and you either keep the whole hand or you throw away the whole hand. You don't get to pick individual cards. I've also been playing Eternal fairly aggressively for the last year, and I made Masters every month for, 10 months in a row, something like that. As I have experienced these different card games, I have created kind of a checklist of various mechanics that I like and dislike. And the night before the Gen Con 5K for Versus system, I was sitting around with my testing group and I was talking about, I like games where the attacker gets to pick who they hit. I dislike games where I declare an attack and then your blockers have the initiative to decide, no, I'm going to get in this guy's way. I'm not a huge fan of life totals. I prefer to have winning and losing the game be all contained within the game. I don't like resources, lands, sigils, whatever the currency is to allow you to play effects in a game. I don't like those cards being shuffled into my main deck. So I had this series of boxes that various games check or don't check, and the more of my game mechanic boxes a game checks, the more I tend to like that game. So at Gen Con, we're walking around the floor after the 5K, and we walk past the Argent Saga booth, one of the Argent Saga booths, and I start kind of listening to what the game mechanics are, and it sounded really good. But I walked away. The next day, we're at Gen Con again, and two of my friends sit down and start to demo the game. And before I even had an opportunity to play it, because the demo tables were so full of people, I went over, I bought all 5 starter decks, I bought a box, and as soon as a table opened up, I was like, okay, I want to play this game. And I was immediately hooked. I love the mechanics of the game. I love the feel of the cards, how heavy they are. It kind of lends itself to this fun, new feeling. Like every card game has had the same, well, very similar thickness of cardstock, but this game's different. And the collection of how it kind of Frankenstein monstered mechanics from all these other card games into one game that checked a ton of my boxes. Now, there's a couple things that initially turned me off. I'm not a huge fan of using the number 1,000 when the number 10 would work just as easy. Clearly, Argent Saga does that. We have 3,500, 2,000, these big numbers. And maybe at some point there'll be design space where they actually utilize all 4 of those places down to the ones and it'll make sense that these numbers are this big. I think that's unlikely. I think in general, this game is going to be 1,000, 1,500, 20, and 10, 15, 20 would work just as well. But no game is exactly perfect. That said, I cannot think of a game that I have encountered that hits my sweet spot as far as the mechanics I like in so many different ways. And within 72 hours of playing the game for the first time, I was really sure that I wanted to produce some content for it, which brings me to this show. What I want to do with Shardlight Radio is produce a weekly podcast that has episodes that are shorter than a half an hour, somewhere between 10-ish to 25-ish minutes per episode, and I want to focus on one topic on each episode. Now, I am a fan of podcasts that are hours long and rambling. I listen to those, but I also like listening to shows that stay on topic. You know roughly how much you're going to get per episode, and you can listen to it in a single sitting. That's the kind of show that I want to produce, and that's the kind of show that Shardlight Radio is going to be. There will be episodes where I have guests or co-hosts come on and help me break down decks or discuss cards, but by and large, this show is going to be me on my own, talking about whatever it is that I've got my mind on with relation to Argent Saga that week. So I hope the show can be of value to the listeners, and I'm really looking forward to getting deep into this game. Now, I want to make a couple promises here. As I just said, I encountered this game for the first time less than a week ago. So there are probably going to be shows where I do some card analysis and I get something wrong. I screw up a rule or I misspeak about how a rule is supposed to be played, and I can almost promise that that's going to happen. But the follow-up promise I want to make is that whenever I get something wrong, I'm going to do my best to go back and correct it on a subsequent episode. I am going to learn this game along with some members of the audience. I'm sure for some people that got in on this game before it even released, my level of experience is going to seem a little silly. Like, who is this dude who just found out about the game starting a show? Well, we're going to go on this journey together, and I will do my best to bring accurate content to the show every week. And if I screw something up, like I said, I'm going to own responsibility for that and try to come back and correct it on a future episode. So if, as an audience, anyone has comments or ideas or things that they'd like to hear, I'd be more than willing to listen to that feedback. And until next time, go win some games.